"Sorry, sir, but you'll need to step aside." The airline attendant's tone is dismissive, almost mechanical, as she gestures toward the side. Officer Marcus West's eyebrows furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean?" he asks, his voice controlled, but the disbelief is unmistakable. "I'm afraid we cannot allow you to board. Please move aside," she repeats, her eyes avoiding him. Marcus stands frozen. His uniform, the badge, the gun, none of it seems to matter here. His grip on his carry-on tightens as he struggles to understand what's happening. This was supposed to be a routine flight back home. Instead, it felt like the walls were closing in. There was no explanation, no acknowledgement of his identity beyond the surface. He's just another passenger, denied his rights. But why? The air in the terminal thickens. Whispers ripple through the crowd like an electric current. Marcus can hear the buzz of murmurs, but they aren't directed at him. They're directed at the attendant, at the situation unfolding before them. Some passengers have pulled out their phones, the small cameras now pointed at him, capturing every moment. Marcus glances around, his heart pounding. A middle-aged woman stands nearby, her phone angled just right to catch his face. A young man on his phone smirks, eyes flicking between the screen and Marcus. "Maybe you should just leave," someone mutters, not loud enough for the attendant to hear, but loud enough for Marcus to catch. His pulse quickens. The injustice isn't just being done to him, it's being witnessed. Yet, no one is doing anything. They're just watching. Marcus steadies his breath. "Why can't I board?" he asks again, more forcefully now. The attendant's lips purse. "There's no seat for you. Move aside." Her voice is flat, impersonal, and completely unyielding. "No seat?" His voice cracks under the weight of the realization. This wasn't about seats or availability. This was about him, his badge, his uniform, his identity. She was refusing him because of something deeper than any policy could explain. Frustration bubbles within him. "Are you serious right now?" His hand shakes as it grips his bag, but he holds his ground. The attendant's gaze flicks to the line behind him, an unmistakable signal to move him out of the way, but it only deepens his sense of injustice. This wasn't about protocol. It was about something far darker. "I'm a police officer," Marcus shouts, his voice cracking with a mix of disbelief and growing anger. "I'm not just some random guy trying to get on this plane." The attendant barely reacts. She doesn't even look at him as she repeats, "There's no seat for you." His blood runs cold. She doesn't even care. His badge, his rank, his service, none of it mattered. "Are you refusing me because of who I am?" Marcus demands, his voice rising. He steps closer to the counter, his frustration boiling over. Still, no explanation. Just the cold, emotionless refusal. Marcus's hands ball into fists at his sides. The humiliation is overwhelming, but what stings most is the realization he's not in control. And there's no one standing up for him. Just as the silence threatens to swallow him whole, a familiar figure steps into his line of sight. Marcus's breath catches in his throat as he turns to see her. Chief Karen Blake, walking with purpose through the terminal. She scans the room, her sharp eyes locking onto the scene. She doesn't hesitate, moving swiftly toward Marcus. The crowd's whispers falter, replaced by a hush of uncertainty. Marcus stands frozen, the shock of the moment lingering in his chest. This could be the moment that changes everything. And in that instant, he knows he's no longer alone. "Another day, another call," Officer Marcus West muttered under his breath as he adjusted his uniform. His shift was just starting, but the weight of the badge felt heavier with each passing day. At 32, he had seen it all, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Yet he remained resolute. Marcus wasn't just a cop. He was a symbol of unwavering dedication to his community. His colleagues respected him, his superiors trusted him, and the people he served knew him as a man who would always answer the call, no matter the cost. "West, good job on that last case," Officer Jennings called out as Marcus walked past the break room. "You're one of the few who can keep it together out there." Marcus offered a tight smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. He didn't need their approval to do his job right. What mattered most was the lives he could protect, the community he could serve, and the duty he held close, even on days when the world seemed determined to challenge him. But even the most committed officers have their limits. As Marcus drove home from the station, he allowed himself a rare moment of escape, imagining a different life, one without the heavy responsibility of his uniform. He pictured himself on a plane, high above the clouds, no badge weighing him down. In his mind, he was free to simply be Marcus West, not Officer West, not the target of prejudice and suspicion. Someday, he whispered to himself, gripping the steering wheel a little tighter as the dream of freedom flickered like a distant light. It wasn't just the job that burdened him. It was the constant feeling that no matter where he went, he would always be seen through the lens of his skin color. Marcus knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. As a black officer, he constantly had to navigate the complexities of systemic racism, both within the police force and in the streets he patrolled. It wasn't just the stares, the comments, or the assumptions. It was the subtle ways people saw him. Not as a man doing his job, but as a symbol of everything they feared and misunderstood. "Officer West, we need you to check out that call. It's in the neighborhood," a fellow officer said, his voice casual, but Marcus could sense the unspoken meaning behind the words. The neighborhood wasn't just a place. It was a stereotype, but Marcus didn't let it show. He couldn't afford to. Every day, he walked the fine line of balancing the badge and confronting the bias that tried to define him. The memory hit him hard as he sat in the squad car, waiting for his next call. His mind flashed back to a time when he was still a rookie officer, fresh out of the academy. "West, why are you standing there? Go do something," Sergeant Dalton had barked, the disdain in his voice unmistakable. Marcus hadn't moved. "I'm waiting for backup, sir," he replied, his voice steady. Dalton didn't care. "Backup? You think I'm going to wait for some rookie to get it together? You should be leading, not waiting." It wasn't just about the call. It was about the assumption that, because of his race, he was less capable. That moment, though brief, had stayed with Marcus. It was a reminder that no matter how much he proved himself, some would always see him through the lens of their own prejudice. Yet, despite everything, Marcus never wavered in his duty. Every shift, every call, he put on the uniform and faced the world. He wasn't just a cop, he was a protector. At the end of the day, the streets he patrolled weren't just lines on a map. They were home to families, to children, to people who needed someone to stand between them and the dangers of the world. Marcus knew the toll it took on him. The long hours, the emotional strain, the constant second-guessing of his worth, especially in the face of racial prejudice. But he kept going because someone had to. "Thanks for having our backs, Marcus," a local resident said one evening, her voice full of gratitude. Marcus nodded, though his smile was weary. It wasn't just his job, it was his life. And yet, even with all the sacrifice, he still held on to hope. Hope that one day the community he loved would see him for who he truly was, and not just the color of his skin. Marcus stepped up to the counter, his flight ticket in hand, ready to board the plane for a much-needed break. The attendant, a young woman with a friendly smile, greeted him warmly at first. "Good afternoon, sir. How can I help you today?" But as she looked at him and took in his uniform, her smile faltered, just for a moment. Her eyes flickered toward the screen in front of her, her fingers hesitating over the keyboard. The air in the terminal felt thicker, as the brief lapse in her demeanor left an unmistakable unease. "Your ID and ticket, please," she requested, the tone still polite but colder now. Marcus noticed the change but didn't say anything. He handed over his documents, trying to brush it off. Maybe it was just a bad day for her. But something about the way her gaze lingered on him unsettled him more than he cared to admit. The attendant quickly scanned his ticket and returned it to him. But Marcus saw her glance shift nervously toward the clock, then back to him. Her fingers moved quickly as if she was trying to finish a task, but her eyes kept darting to him, lingering just long enough for him to notice. "Is there a problem?" Marcus asked, his patience beginning to fray. He could feel the unease in the air. She wasn't looking at him like she looked at the other passengers. There was something in her eyes that he couldn't quite pinpoint. No, just a minute, sir," she stammered. "It's, just a system issue." The words were rehearsed, the explanation too smooth to be true. But Marcus stood there, waiting, his stomach knotting as the seconds ticked by. He could sense that something wasn't right. He glanced over her shoulder toward the waiting area. The flight seemed nearly full, but Marcus couldn't ignore the empty seats scattered throughout the cabin. It didn't make sense. "Are you sure there's no seat for me?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "I see a few open spots." The attendant's smile returned, but it was forced, and her eyes didn't quite meet his. "Unfortunately, sir, the flight is overbooked. I'm afraid there's no room for you." Marcus glanced back again, this time noting that the empty seats seemed plentiful in a section near the back. His brow furrowed. "Are you telling me all those seats are taken?" The attendant hesitated, her hand frozen in midair. "Yes, sir. They're reserved for other passengers," she said, her voice slightly higher now, as if trying to convince herself more than him. Marcus's frustration started to rise. He had been on flights before, seen overbooked situations, but something about this didn't sit right. He wasn't asking for special treatment, just fairness. "Why am I being treated differently?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. "I'm just asking for a seat like everyone else. Why is this situation so different?" The attendant's response was evasive. "It's just company policy, sir. There's nothing I can do." Her eyes avoided his as she spoke, and Marcus could hear the faintest tremor in her voice. "Policy?" Marcus repeated, narrowing his eyes. "That's the best you've got?" She looked around nervously, lowering her voice as she spoke. "I really can't do anything, sir. Please understand." The words were dismissive, empty, and Marcus felt a rising tension in his chest. This wasn't just about a seat. It was about something deeper, something unspoken. Marcus stood there, the weight of the moment crashing down on him. The pieces began to fall into place. The nervous glances, the reluctance to engage with him directly, the overbooked flight with empty seats. It wasn't about policy. It was about something else. His pulse quickened, and the truth became clear. The problem wasn't that there wasn't room for him. The problem was that he was black. In a flash, the uniform he wore, the badge that had once protected him, that had once earned him respect, meant nothing here. The same system that relied on him to protect and serve was the very one that had failed him in this moment. "I need to speak with your supervisor," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the anger bubbling beneath the surface. The attendant glanced up at him, her eyes betraying a flash of fear. She didn't respond right away, but Marcus could feel the shift in the air as the tension escalated. She was stalling, and he knew it. The silence between them stretched longer than it should have, each second an uncomfortable reminder of the inequality he was up against. Marcus felt the anger rising within him, tightening his chest as the attendant's eyes darted around, looking for a way to end this exchange. Her voice grew louder, now tinged with frustration. "Sir, I've already told you. There's nothing I can do. Please, step aside." The sudden change in her tone shocked him. She wasn't offering help, she was dismissing him outright. The people around them started to look over, sensing the tension in the air. Marcus tried to keep his voice calm, though it trembled slightly with the weight of his frustration. "I'm not trying to cause trouble. I just want to understand. There are empty seats. Why can't I sit?" Her lips tightened, and she raised her voice again, louder this time. "Sir," I said, "step aside. I'll call security if I need to." The pressure was mounting. Marcus could feel the weight of the eyes on him, judging, whispering. He wasn't just a man trying to get on a plane anymore. He was the subject of an uncomfortable spectacle. From a few rows behind, a white passenger, middle-aged with a gruff voice, stood up and shouted, "What's the holdup? Why are you wasting everyone's time with this?" His words cut through the growing tension, adding fuel to the fire. Marcus could hear his voice rise above the murmur of confusion. "Why are we letting this guy hold up the flight? There's plenty of room, so what's the problem?" The attendant looked flustered, glancing at Marcus and then back at the man. "Please, sit down, sir. I'm handling this," she replied, but her voice wavered slightly. Marcus took a deep breath, fighting to stay composed. The crowd was getting restless, some passengers glancing at him with pity, others with disdain. This wasn't just an isolated incident anymore. It was becoming a public event, and he was caught in the middle of it. Realizing the situation was spiraling out of control, Marcus took a step back, trying to de-escalate. "Look, I'll get off the flight. I don't want to cause any more trouble," he said, his voice steady, but his mind raced. "No, that's not necessary," the attendant replied quickly, but there was an edge to her words now. She seemed almost relieved at the idea of him stepping away, but Marcus wasn't so sure. "I'll get off, no problem," he repeated, trying to show that he wasn't looking for confrontation. But the attendant wasn't listening. "It's too late now," she snapped, her earlier politeness gone entirely. "We can't keep doing this. Please step aside and let's move on." Her tone was dismissive, and Marcus could feel the sting of rejection in her words. His attempt to de-escalate had failed. If anything, it had only made things worse. Just as he started to turn toward the gate, trying to remove himself from the situation, the attendant called after him. "Maybe you should have thought about that before becoming a cop," she spat. The words hit Marcus like a slap. His heart pounded, and for a moment he couldn't breathe. The crowd went silent, the weight of her insult hanging in the air. He turned back to face her, his fists clenching at his sides. "What did you just say?" The attendant didn't back down. "You heard me," she sneered. "You think being a cop makes you special? Think again. This isn't about you and your uniform. It's about people like you who think they're above everyone else." Marcus felt his throat tighten. His uniform had always been a symbol of respect. At least, it had been in his world. But now, in front of this crowd, in this moment, it felt like the very thing that marked him for scorn. The passengers watched in stunned silence, some shaking their heads, others pulling out their phones. The betrayal of it all, the cruelty in her words, the public humiliation, it hit him harder than anything he'd felt in years. The hum of whispers filled the air, punctuated by the sharp clicks of phone cameras capturing every moment. A few passengers exchanged uncomfortable glances, unsure of what to do. Some stared straight ahead, pretending not to notice. Others sneaked glances, their eyes full of judgment. Marcus felt every set of eyes on him, as though he were the center of a cruel circus. He wasn't just a man trying to board a flight anymore. He was a spectacle, a symbol of something darker than he could bear to comprehend. A woman in the corner, shaking her head, muttered, "Should have just let it go." Another voice, louder this time, scoffed, "Typical." The cold, judgmental silence enveloped him, and he realized with a sickening certainty they weren't seeing him as a man. They were seeing him as a problem. Inside, Marcus felt the familiar rush of anger, the heat of injustice boiling beneath his skin, but he kept his face impassive, fighting to keep his composure. He couldn't show weakness, he couldn't let them see the hurt. His fists clenched, and his body trembled, but his mind was sharper than ever. He had to hold himself together. He had to stand strong in the face of this cruelty, but the weight of the situation was suffocating. Every word, every glare, every insult, it all pushed down on him like a heavy stone. He wanted to scream, to lash out, to let them know how wrong they were. But instead he stood there, his mouth dry, his heart pounding in his chest. As the seconds stretched into what felt like hours, Marcus realized the true weight of what had just happened. He was trapped. Not just physically, but in a public moment of humiliation that he couldn't escape. The crowd continued to watch, some recording, others whispering, but none of them intervened. They had all become silent witnesses to the injustice unfolding before them. He looked around, feeling like the walls were closing in. There was no way out. The words of the attendant still stung, and the weight of her cruel remark settled deep within him. The reality hit him. This was bigger than a flight. This was about power. It was about race. And in that moment, Marcus felt more powerless than ever before. But even as the humiliation engulfed him, he stood, barely holding on but standing. The terminal doors swung open with a sharp snap, and the moment the figure stepped inside, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. Police Chief Karen Blake entered the scene, her gaze quickly sweeping over the tension-filled atmosphere. She didn't need to ask what was happening, it was clear. Marcus, at the center, his posture rigid, face tight with suppressed anger. The attendant stood a few feet away, flustered and defensive. Blake's eyes locked onto Marcus, recognizing the growing chaos. She knew, instinctively, that something had shifted. Her presence was about to make all the difference. The energy in the room subtly shifted as the crowd began to take note of her authoritative entrance. The murmurs hushed, and the air crackled with a mix of anticipation and apprehension. This wasn't just another situation. It was about to become something bigger. Blake moved slowly through the terminal, her eyes never leaving the scene in front of her. She could see the way Marcus stood, his body tensed, but trying to maintain control. The attendant's stiff posture told another story. She could feel the underlying hostility, the unease in the air. She paused, taking in the dynamics between them. Marcus was clearly at his limit, but it wasn't just his frustration that was palpable. It was the way the crowd was reacting. Some eyes were full of pity, others more judgmental, their discomfort making the whole situation feel even more suffocating. The airline manager, standing at a distance, avoided making eye contact. Blake's gaze moved over him and back to Marcus. This was no longer just about one man's problem. It was a power struggle, and Blake knew it was time for her to step in. Without hesitation, Blake approached the airline manager, her voice cutting through the tension like a sharp blade. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, her tone low but commanding. The manager froze for a split second, his eyes widening slightly as he processed who had just spoken. Blake's reputation preceded her. There was no mistaking the weight of her authority. He stammered for a moment, trying to find the right words. "Well, it's just that—" Blake interrupted him, her gaze steady. "Don't dodge the question. Is there a problem?" The crowd around them seemed to lean in, sensing that this was a turning point. Marcus, standing a few feet away, felt the shift, a sliver of hope threading its way through the anger that had gripped him. Blake wasn't just an observer. She was here to change the game. The manager swallowed hard, realizing his initial response wasn't enough. His face flushed as he glanced nervously at the attendant and then back at Blake. "Well, there's a situation. This man," he began, but his words faltered under the weight of Blake's unyielding stare. He cleared his throat, attempting to regain his composure. "It's just a misunderstanding. There's no need for any escalation, really." Blake's eyes narrowed. "Misunderstanding?" she repeated, her voice steady, but the implications of her words hung in the air. It's clear there's more going on here than just that. The manager's attempt to deflect fell flat. His nervousness was palpable, and it was clear he wasn't used to being challenged in this way. Blake wasn't buying his excuses. Blake stood firm, her presence unwavering, and the shift in the atmosphere was immediate. The energy around them changed from one of tension to uncertainty. The airline staff, including the attendant who had previously been so assertive, began to shrink under Blake's unrelenting gaze. The crowd, once passive spectators, now seemed uncertain. Some of them even took a step back as if the very nature of the situation was being redefined. Marcus, who had been on the defensive, felt the balance of power tilt in his favor. Blake's calm, authoritative demeanor made it clear she wasn't here to let anyone get away with discrimination. The crowd, once divided in their reactions, now seemed united in their realization that this wasn't just a small dispute. It was a fight for respect, dignity, and justice. For the first time, Marcus felt as though he might not be alone in this battle. Blake reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. Her movements were deliberate, calculated, each step taken with purpose. She unlocked the phone, scrolling quickly to find the number she needed. "This situation will be dealt with, and you'll be held accountable," she said softly, more to herself than anyone else. She dialed the number and waited, each second stretching out as the room fell into a tense silence. The crowd sensed that something big was about to happen. The phone clicked as the line connected. "Yes, it's Chief Blake," she said. "I need to speak with someone from the airline's corporate office right now. We have a serious issue that needs to be addressed immediately." The manager shifted uneasily, but there was nothing he could do. Blake wasn't backing down. The call was the first step in a chain of events that would expose the systemic issues at play, the policies that allowed this discrimination to fester unchecked. Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything that had been building up to this moment. As Blake spoke on the phone, Marcus felt something stir inside him. A surge of courage he hadn't felt since the confrontation began. It wasn't just Blake's authority that gave him strength. It was the realization that he wasn't just another man standing in a terminal. He was a person who deserved to be heard, who had a right to stand up. Blake's words, the way she took control, reminded him that the fight wasn't over yet. She was an ally, and that made all the difference. Marcus stood taller now, his posture straightener, his resolve stronger. He wasn't powerless anymore. With Blake by his side, he felt ready to face whatever came next. The weight of the situation was still heavy, but the moment had changed. The tide had turned, and he wasn't going to let it slip away. Within hours, the video had gone viral. A clip of Marcus, humiliated and wrongly accused, was now streaming across every social media platform. Thousands of shares, retweets, and comments flooded in. Outrage erupted like a wave, and Marcus's face became a symbol of injustice for people across the globe. "Enough is enough," one comment read. "This is what happens when we stay silent." Another video surfaced soon after, showing the airline staff's dismissive behavior before the incident, further fueling the fire. Public pressure intensified, and soon, #Justice for Marcus began trending. The world watched as the story spread, drawing attention to the deeply embedded systemic racism within the airline industry. Marcus, though overwhelmed by the attention, couldn't help but feel a surge of validation. The world was listening, and they weren't going to turn a blind eye. The airline, now under fire, issued a public apology the next day. "We deeply regret the incident involving Mr. Marcus Davis. This does not reflect our company values." The statement felt rehearsed, robotic, and hollow, but it wasn't enough. People saw through the empty words. "Apologies don't erase the harm done," one person tweeted. The apology, instead of soothing the public, only intensified the backlash. The hashtag grew even stronger, and a storm of criticism began to flood the airline's social media accounts. It was too little, too late. Marcus's story had already become a symbol for a much larger issue, an issue that could no longer be ignored. The press conference was tense. Journalists bombarded the CEO with questions about the incident, demanding accountability for what had transpired. "How could such a thing happen in 2025? One reporter pressed. The CEO shifted uncomfortably in his chair, visibly sweating under the heat of the scrutiny. "We are deeply sorry," he said, his voice faltering. "We have already begun a review of our internal processes." But the questions didn't stop. "Is this an isolated incident, or does this reflect the culture of your company?" the CEO stammered, struggling to regain his composure. The uncomfortable truth was now clear. This wasn't just about a single employee's actions. It was a reflection of a much deeper problem within the company. The airline was under a microscope, And the public wasn't satisfied with generic apologies. The airline took swift action. The staff members involved in Marcus's humiliation were suspended pending an investigation. The company's Human Resources Department launched a thorough internal review, vowing to uncover the full scope of the incident and determine what led to such discriminatory behavior. For the first time in a long while, people began to feel that real consequences might be coming. This wasn't just a slap on the wrist, it was the start of real accountability. The investigation wouldn't be easy, but it had to happen, and as the news broke, many felt a sense of justice creeping into the narrative. The airline's leadership could no longer hide behind corporate jargon or empty apologies. They would be forced to face the truth. While the battle wasn't over, Marcus felt a shift. As his story spread, support poured in from every direction. Colleagues, activists, strangers on the street. Messages of solidarity flooded his inbox. "You're not alone in this," one email read. "We're standing with you." It wasn't just about the viral video anymore. It was about dignity, respect, and the restoration of his personal strength. He had been wronged, but now it seemed like the world was rallying behind him. For every hateful comment, there were 10 words of encouragement. His dignity, once taken from him in that terminal, was slowly being restored. Marcus wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for the countless others who had experienced the same. What began as one man's battle against injustice had now transformed into a movement. Marcus's name was no longer just associated with his personal experience. It had become a rallying cry for change. People across the nation began to speak out, sharing their own stories of systemic racism. "It's time to stop pretending this doesn't happen," one marcher shouted during a protest. "We stand with Marcus." Activists, community leaders, and even ordinary citizens took to the streets and social media, demanding systemic change in corporations and institutions. Marcus had become the face of a movement, an emblem of resilience. His courage had sparked something much bigger, an ongoing conversation about racism and inequality that had to be addressed. And though the journey was just beginning, Marcus knew this fight was far from over. As Marcus boarded the plane, a simple act that would have once been routine now felt like a personal victory. He stared out the window, reflecting on the journey that had brought him here, the battle for justice, the painful moments of humiliation, and the strength he had found within himself. But there was still a long road ahead. The fight for systemic change wasn't over. Marcus knew that this was just the beginning. As the plane soared into the sky, he couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. The world was changing, and he had played a part in making that happen. In that moment, Marcus's humiliation wasn't just a personal attack, it was a glaring reflection of the larger systemic injustice that exists everywhere. We've all seen it, felt it, or even experienced it ourselves. A glance, a comment, a moment that leaves a scar. It's not just about one individual, it's about a pattern, a culture of discrimination that affects all of us. Take a moment. Think about how much one unjust act can ripple through our lives. How many times have we seen someone silenced, treated unfairly, or judged because of who they are? This is more than just a story. It's a reality that too many face every day, and now it's time to take a stand. I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt the sting of discrimination? Maybe it was in a crowded room or in a small, quiet moment where someone made you feel invisible, lesser. Whether you've been in Marcus's shoes or witnessed someone else's struggle, we're all connected by this experience. Share your story in the comments. Your voice matters. It's time we bring these moments to light. Break the silence and stand together. Don't let your story go untold. Let's make sure the world hears us. Now's the time for action. This conversation must continue. If you believe in standing up against injustice, if you believe in the power of change, like, comment, and subscribe. Every click, every comment adds fuel to this movement. It's time to amplify our voices and keep pushing for change. Let's make this conversation bigger. Let's make it impossible to ignore. Share this video, spread the message, and keep the fight for equality alive. Your voice matters. Together, we can make sure it's heard.